Welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. I guess we gotta just get it out the way and talk about the Charizard PWCC auction that sold for a little less than $312,000 because everybody's crying out, Pokemon Crash, the crash is coming. You know, look, it's 25% decrease in probably one of the most well-known, most expensive cards in the hobby. And I'm not here to tell you that on this video. I do think something very strong is happening in the market. And I know a lot of you guys out there have a weird gut feeling, and you're right. You should feel it in your gut because there is something going on. But I don't think it's really a crash that's happening. And I'm going to tell you what I think is happening, but also where you should be pivoting your collection to. So that's what this video is going to be about. And I'm going to tell you why that Charizard went down. Because that Charizard was overvalued. And I'm also going to tell you that I believe that Charizards have always been overvalued, whether they were $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $500,000, or back to $312,000. They're always overvalued. And there's something very important you need to understand in this hobby. At the very high end, the ultra high end, so top of the line, big dollar cards, a lot of the big trades that happen are not all cash. So when you do have a trade that is all cash, so that's pretty much what PWCC is. It is a big trade. Somebody traded their Shadowless First Edition Charizard, and somebody else traded a big pile of Benjamins. So it is a trade. But a lot of times when you see these First Edition PSA 10 Charizards change hands, they're not just all cash deals. There's a lot of cards that are involved, so the numbers get changed a lot. And when you're getting to these very high dollar amount cards, especially the Charizard First Edition, it gets tricky, right? Because your buyer pool shrinks so drastically and so quickly when you get to that very high dollar amount. There's very few people willing to trade cash for that card. And that's the truth. So you can see huge swings in volatility for that card. A lot of the run-up we've seen in this card has not been by true collectors or people that are real entrenched in this hobby. A lot of the run-up for the dollar amount for this card has been made by a lot of people investing in Charizards. And listen, when it comes to investing in Shadowless First Edition Charizard, historically, it's a good investment. And I've said it in a long video ago. No one has ever lost money on a Charizard First Edition PSA 10. And if there is a single person out there that lost money in that card, they never should have been in that card in the first place. Because anyone who wants to decide to buy that card should be into that card for the right reasons. Anytime you're going to go after the top end or the high end of any collectible, I don't care if it's Pokemon or whatever, if you're going to go after the highest, most sought-after dollar amount card, you have to be willing to sit on that card. And if you have no emotional investment in that card, there is a large, there's a very good chance that you're going to fail on that card and you're going to lose money. And I'm afraid what's happening with a lot of these quote-unquote investors that are getting into this hobby that aren't like super in love with the cards or aren't super in love with the hobby, when it comes to these real huge dollar amounts, they're going to start to get nervous and they're going to start to try to get rid of their Charizard PSA 10s. But what we're already seeing happen is because we've had so many record sales recently, people that bought this card not too long ago are already up a ton of money in all their Charizard First Edition cards. But the problem is, even with the most true Pokemon collectors, with the exception of like 5 people in the entire world, most hardcore collectors have sold out of their Charizard First Editions. And the reason why is because at some point down the line, whether that card was at $1,000, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000, or $500,000, the true collectors and the true investors probably got out of their, positions a long time ago. Because in this hobby, it is really hard to have so much value tied up in one card. And there's a lot of people that are in this hobby who have, gained very large positions in their collection over a long amount of time. And when I say a long time, we're talking, a decade plus of hard work buying cards. When you have one of your cards go up that much in value, at some point down the line, most collectors and investors have justified selling that card because, unless they took 100% of the money and, put a huge down payment on a house or paid off their house or did whatever, most of the time they took that money and they reinvested in the hobby because they were like, you know what? My Charizard Shadowless First Edition PSA 10 at the time was worth $50,000. You know what? I believe if I sell that card, I could take that $50,000 and invest in other places in the market or in the Pokemon market and do way better in the long term. And that's the thought process a lot of people have. Because by selling off Charizards for different people, it grew people's collections big time and it gave them tons of breathing room. So what happened is all these cards have now made it in their way of, call it, the cardboard hand type investors. The people that are not in Pokemon for the right reasons. The people that are just in it for the wrong reasons, and that's the dollar amount. There's room for that, don't get me wrong. But in the long term, these guys, will probably not do as well as other people. Sure, they're following the money right now, and historically, following the money can be beneficial if you catch it at the right time. But if you start to follow money and you catch it at the wrong time, eventually somebody becomes a bag holder and you get burned super bad. And I think that's what eventually we'll start to see with like Charizard First Edition, especially in PSA 10, these real big dollar amount cards, because like I said, the actual true collectors that are holding on to these cards are, getting that pool of true collectors is just getting smaller and smaller every day. So now I'm going to at least let you guys know, where am I in the hobby right now? What am I doing? And I've said it before, I don't sit on Charizard First Editions. I never have, because one, not a Charizard fan, and two, they're always at the high end of the market, so they're always worth it to sell. They were never worth it for me to hold on to. Sure, throw me in a time machine. Let's look back on it. Was that a good play? No. But has that changed, the way I'm in this hobby? No. Do I think I'm better off by being able to have a larger collection than just sitting on, potentially 2 or 3 cards? Yeah, of course I think I'm better off. At least this hobby's way more fun for me because I'm able to expand. But now this comes to the point in the video of, what am I doing right now? What have I always done? What have I always told you guys I do? I always send away a ton of cards for grading. I send away multiple of the same cards, duplicates, triplicates, quadruplicates, and I get the highest grade. I keep that grade. I put it into my personal collection, and then I sell off all the lower grades. And that's something that's very important for the long term for me personally. But you guys are going to have to really start to realize what's going to happen to this market in the very near term. We're going to see a huge flood of low-grade cards eventually hit the market. And there has always been money to be made in low-grade cards. It's very easy to pick up, beat up raw cards, pay, the $7 or $10, or I guess now it's $20, whatever the PSA fee is. Pay that fee, and then flip those cards instantly on the secondary market at very low grades, because there's always people there that would buy them, and there was a little bit of money to be made there. Eventually, we're going to see that pool of low grade, call it base set unlimited cards. Eventually, the market in the very near term, with all these CGC and PSA returns, is going to saturate the market with low grades. So what you guys need to be doing right now is taking hard looks at your personal collection. Figure out where your graded collection is, where your raw collection is, and start to make hard pivots into the higher grade cards. That means if you have a few, lower grade cards that you don't feel super comfortable with, you should be doing whatever you can at this moment while the market is still decent to pivot away from your lower grades and start to replace those cards with higher grades of the same card. Because at the end of the day, the only cards that are going to really hold true long-term value in this hobby are going to be the high-grade cards. And that's what it's going to eventually come down to. We haven't seen it yet. But I do believe in the long term, anything less than like PSA 9 is going to be like not as sought after at all. And PSA 10s are always going to hold the volume, are always going to hold like a higher dollar amount. And that's definitely where you need to start moving your money into and start moving your collection into. And you know what? There's a lot of cards and there's a lot of sets right now that I want to tell you guys, to start moving into. But I can't do that because anytime I mention cards nowadays, people seem to get upset, like I'm trying to influence the market. But all I can say is, if you're not at that ultra high end being real big dollar amount cards, you can still be in, I wouldn't call it high end, but, middle to getting close to high end-ish. And that's like the $500 to $2,000 range. There's a huge amount of like really super, super undervalued cards within that $500 to $2,000 range. And you can span those cards across multiple sets, multiple generations, and you gotta be at the point in this hobby now, especially if you've somehow found this channel. That means you've gone real deep down the YouTube Pokemon rabbit hole to eventually wind up on this channel. So that means you've been in this hobby and you at least know enough by now that you need to start really looking at individual sets and looking at the cards and figuring out which ones are undervalued. I can't be the one to tell you that. Joe Smo down the street can't be the one to tell you that. At the end of the day, it's going to have to be you that gets to that next level. That is the next level, the next plateau in this hobby, is you need to eventually start to move into, I don't call these high-end cards at 500 to 2,000, but a lot of these vintage cards are going to hold longer term value because the high fluctuation that we see with valuations of cards is going to be in the more speculative market. And when I call speculative market, you know what I really think it is? I think it's the lazy market. That's what it is, the lazy market. Because for somebody to come into this hobby and buy a Shadowless First Edition Charizard doesn't take any knowledge. It doesn't take any skill. It doesn't take anything. It just, that's not the way you should be in this hobby if that's where you're focusing. You need to focus where the collectors and the true investors are. And the true investors and the true collectors have a lot of high-end $500 to $2,000 PSA 10 cards. And that's where you want to be. And the cards that I'm talking about are not flashy. They're not like the big hard hitter names, and they're not the super modern cards. I would not have your money tied up in ultra modern cards right now, especially a lot of these high-end ultra modern cards. We could potentially see the market start to flood with these cards. Where you're going to have the least amount of volatility is with the true collectors and investors, because at the end of the day, one, they know the true value of that card, and number two, they're collectors. They'll freaking sit on that card forever. I got a bunch of Raichus, PSA 10s that I'll sit on till the day I die if they go down to $0. There's no reason I have to sell a lot of my favorite cards. There's zero reason. Sure, if the dollar amount was right, maybe I would sell them, but I would say that I've already seen a few dollar amounts that I would say was the right price already come and go, and I just, continue to watch these cards increase. But that's just something you guys really need to look at. Where is going to be the least volatility in the market? If you've been in this hobby long enough and all you're doing is you're sitting on a ton of, unlimited PSA 5s and 6s and 7s and 8s or whatever you just got back, and you haven't been able to actually dive into any of these sets or really understand the true chase cards, If you don't understand, there are true chase cards. If you're not looking at, the cards that are very high end, but yet there aren't a lot of people going into the market because maybe they feel priced out of those cards, those cards are all super undervalued still. Where you got to be nervous about, like I said, is the unlimited crap from base set. A lot of these Team Rocket first edition cards you got to be careful with, and all this ultra modern stuff. And there's a lot of different stuff in between, you know. Listen, I'm a strong believer. I think Evolutions is overvalued. I don't think it's worth $1,000. Will we ever see a retrace of $1,000? I don't even know. We might see $1,000 booster boxes for Evolution forever. But if you're going to say, is that where I want my money to be right now? I'm going to tell you no. But that's just who I am. I thought Evolution's booster boxes are overvalued at $400. So who am I to really talk about Evolutions? All I can tell you is I know where I'm pivoting to and where a lot of my, investing and where my collection is headed to. One, it's headed away from these low grade cards. I have a ton of low grade cards. That's how I've always gone about, is grading everything. I don't care. A lot of people out there will tell you don't grade the crap cards. I'm fine with grading the crap cards because I'm a strong believer in two things. There's rarity and there's scarcity. And if you understand the difference, scarcity, you can have very low dollar amount cards. Call it bulk for all I care. But if there's only one PSA on the entire market and the pop is one of some garbage card, and you spent I keep saying $7, but if you spent $20 or whatever PSA's current price is, and there's somebody out there who's willing to pay you $30 or willing to pay you $40 for that card because it's a pop one, even though it has no rarity to it at all because it's just, part of bulk. But listen, I understand how rarity works. That's where I've always made my money in this hobby, is by selling a lot of rarity cards. It takes a lot more work. You have to really love this hobby and really be willing to grind and just have cards coming in and out constantly 24/7 and never stops. But there's always been money to be made there. So I'm not telling you not to have these cards. I'm just telling you, if you're looking to have these cards to collect and not to flip and not to just have them constantly turning over for money coming in and for money coming out, you need to be very careful, because in the very near term, there is a possibility that you can get burned real bad. So that's what I think is happening to this market. I don't think it's a bubble. I think it's just a market correction. It's a big correction that's going to happen. And the difference between a bubble and a market correction, with the run-up this hobby has seen, they're going to be very reminiscent. People are going to look at what's going to happen in this hobby in the very near term, and they're going to call it the bubble popping. They're not going to call it the market correcting, because a lot of people are just too new to this hobby. They've been spoiled. You guys are spoiled with the prices of these cards. I'm spoiled. I catch myself doing it all the time. I understand. I look at my collection every day and I see what's happening to the valuation of my collection, of my cards, of the sets I have, of the sealed product. It's crazy. We're very, very spoiled right now, currently in the market. And it's going to correct. But it's not going to correct back to like pre-2000, pre-2019, 2018 levels. We will not see that type of correction. We're just not going to see it. But if you are worried, if you are vulnerable in a lot of these areas, and I'm still going to tell you that it's okay to, spread your investment around in this hobby. If you want to be in modern, that's fine. But don't be so heavily invested in modern that if the price of a booster box swings $30 or $50, in the wrong direction, you're going to be bankrupt. Like, you need to really consider what you're doing right now, if that's even the slightest bit of a possibility. And if you are worried about that, you need to grow in this hobby and find areas where you're not going to see this, such extreme volatility swings. When it comes to investing in Pokemon, at the end of the day, what you want is strong, long-term gains. And you know what? Strong long-term gains are not super fancy. They're not flashy. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to do better off with long-term gains than you are trying to chase like the dollar. And that's the truth. I've been in this hobby long enough. I know that the part of my collection that has increased the most over time is the stuff that I have sat on. And yeah, a lot of that stuff I've sat on because, it's part of my collecting where I try to keep the highest, best condition cards. And over time, I've seen the highest uptrend from those cards. And yeah, I do flip cards day to day to help offset the cost of my collection. And that will never change. But I'm just letting the new collectors out there know, or the collectors that are returned to the hobby, or old collectors that have been in this hobby forever and just forget this stuff and need to be reminded of this once in a while. I need to remind myself of it once in a while. Sometimes I realize like, ooh, spreading myself out a little too thin in this area. Let me retrace a little bit and build better positions other places, because you don't ever want to be, too heavily invested in one area of this market. I see what happens. I talk about the Charizard PWCC auction, and next thing I know, it's 20 minutes later of me just rambling nonsense. But anyways, that's what I think is going on in the market. Make sure your collections are in the right spot. If you guys are listening to this channel, I want you to be successful. I do not want you to get burned. But hey, listen, if somehow you've listened to me ramble for 20 plus minutes and you're still not subscribed to this channel, hit that subscribe button. And if you listen to me ramble and you're a fan of this channel, hit that like button. With the YouTube algorithm, helps me out a lot. But other than that, catch you guys on the next video.